I gave this presentation at the Wyoming Press Association back in, seriously? You're writing that down. Wyoming Press Association.
Not that big a brown nose.
Yeah, I know. It's like, you don't need to. Anyway, so I gave this presentation at the Wyoming Press Association back in February, and really it's just about what I would consider I don't remember how many, there's like 4 or 5 principles that are, to me, are pretty basic, but are the standard for how to just make really clean pages that are easy to navigate, where you know what is the most important thing down to the least important thing on the page. So anyway, there's some slides in here that I don't. This was just me introducing myself, but in case anyone doesn't know, I've designed. This is the 4th paper I've designed at, and so before here I was at the Hartford Courant as in the design department, and then the Miami Herald, and then Corpus Christi Caller-Times. Anyway. And then I do this magazine called DGO. It's this thing in Durango. You may have heard of it.
Fuck.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you guys cover pod?
A little, here and there. Here and there. Yeah. Okay, so these are the 4 things I am going to be talking about. Ways to make, I guess it's 5 things. There's 5 things there. I can't count. So yeah, content-driven design, and so actually the reason I mentioned my past before is when I started as just a copy editor designer. There's nothing special. It was just I took an interest in it, and I found that I really liked doing it, and so and I had some people show me some things, but. I don't know. I say that because like it's all within us to do all of these things. A lot of them are very just objective, scientific. There's nothing creative about hardly any of this stuff. So that's cool. So content driving design and vice versa. So when I did a critique of the Wyoming papers, and good God, most of these were like weekly papers, and there were a lot of issues, but a lot of it, had to do with a lot of, violating a lot of these rules. But one of the things that I'm always critiquing is make just things that don't have any, there's no logic behind it. Like, so everything that you do on a page in terms of design should have some logic. It should have a reason behind it. So I always say that design is not about making things look pretty. So adding doodads and little colors for no reason are to be avoided. Big one is navigation. So the design, again, should be logical in the way that you would like a reader to navigate the page, the package, and that comes through hierarchies and balance and simplification. It should be clear to the reader without them having to think about it, where to go on the page, what to look at first, and navigate through the page. So a lot of that has to do with hierarchy in terms of, and I'll of course have examples to demonstrate all this stuff, but hierarchy, so the size of photos, the size of headlines, how much something is taking up, how much space something is taking up on the page. It should be a natural progression for the readers to navigate through hierarchy. Balancing pages, I have a lot of examples of this. How to use visual components, how to use different size headers and whatnot to balance the page. You want to break up gray space. So just strategically using all of the elements on your page to create that balance. Story lengths is a big one that I'll have some stuff that I marked up in some of these pages here. And then simplifying everything. The Hartford Courant, which they won World's Best Design in the Society for news design 2 years back in the mid-2000s, right before I got there. But their big design philosophy is simplification, just keeping pages uncluttered. You don't want totally gray pages, but you don't want all these elements that are cluttering. So simplifying that. Thank you. And then knowing your limitations is a big one. So it hasn't happened to me at a newspaper in quite some time, but disasters in Photoshop are something to avoid. So once you get the power of Photoshop, it's easy to go overboard. So knowing your limitations, knowing limitations of time. If you're thinking about doing, some quick breakout boxes, whatnot. So that's a little bit like for some more advanced stuff. Okay, so I am going to jump in to some pages and just give examples of some of the principles that I was talking about before. Talking about hierarchy. So I don't know what the percentages would be, but there should always be a clear distinction between the sizes of headlines. A lot of times I notice headlines, especially when they get small, they're like the same size and you're not quite sure which is most important. Of course, how they're playing on the page will indicate that, So this kind of gets that news headline, that news font, the newsy headline font. And that's going to signify something to the reader that this is a certain kind of story that they might get used to by reading the Herald regularly. But using this light typeface for a centerpiece, for kind of a lighter story, lighter typeface, like that's the kind of the logic there. The big one here is spacing. So this is something that I notice a lot when I'm looking at the Herald, is inconsistent spacing. And it's one thing that if you get it right, it's not something that someone's going to look at and be like, oh my God, like what's wrong with this page? This page doesn't look good. But if you have really consistent spacing, it's just going to make for a much cleaner page. So if you notice, like all of the spacing I have, even between elements, it's all the same, or pretty close to it. This is a little close. It's not totally exact, but it's pretty close. Things are lining up. Well, they actually aren't, but the space here is the same as the space here between this and this rule that you probably can't see from there. So anyway, consistent spacing all around. There should be some really clear logic in that spacing. Throwing splashes of color. I'll have some more examples of this, but for instance here, put the names in red to make them pop a little bit more. Let's see here. One thing I'll be talking about a lot is photo content. So I'm sure you guys remember it was something that I was always thinking about when I was the design editor, but making sure that the photos are reading, so if the subject of the photo is smaller, those will work for small photos, but if it's, this photo wouldn't have worked as well, smaller like that, because the subject of the photo is much smaller in the photo. So how they were cropped here, their heads are all pretty much the same size, and I think the rule of thumb is like a dime size for faces. Like that's where you want to hit it, because usually faces won't be readable past that. This is sort of an outlier of a page, but I wanted to bring it up for talking about some of the spacing. You can't see this hairline rule here, but again, all the spacing is consistent there. That rule. So yeah, spacing. But I won't totally talk about that one because that was just such a monster of a page. Thinking about, again, talking about spacing, using color. So since this was like black and white, it's like something in the past. You know, thinking about logic through color, I went with a gray and white and black band over that to tie that in.
Why was it? There was color photography during the Vietnam War.
I don't know. Not when they're pushing the helicopter off the boat. Thinking about kind of like alt formats, how to so like using these things here. I was proud of this because we got all of these. They're all very the same. So like they're the sizes of the faces and stuff, all the same or very close. The crops were very similar. So looking for consistency in everything that you're doing, and that goes to lining things up. There's some examples here of things that there's no logic of like how things are supposed to be lined up. So if you notice like this box here, I would rather see it aligned to the top of the column than like floated in the middle. One thing I talk about a lot is trapping white space. And I'll have some examples of that in like headline treatments. But in general, you want your white space to go to the edges, to the outside of each package, instead of like trapping it inside. So that's why this is lined up at the top so that the white space is all down here instead of having some white space up here and some white space there. So let's see here. I was talking about, so one of the things that I mentioned first was content driving design. So anytime you can have, do you guys know what I mean by that? Content drives design? So
you work with what you got.
well, you want the design to reflect the content that you have. So using these quotes, like pulling those quotes out, and
You had the good quotes to use. Like,
right,
like
but
three
it's,
of them are missing. Then wow.
but yeah, right.
That's
It's because
people love
like
quotes.
I said, let's get some quotes from people, and that way I could then design something cool. You know, so it's not like I was like, I want the page to look like this, and let's go find the quotes. I mean, that could work as well,
You know
but
what, maybe part of that is I don't think we have anyone from our desk anymore on the 20. Maybe like with 21-day planning.
Oh, right,
You know,
yeah.
we would work to try and integrate that.
Mhm.
So I don't think sort of thinking about
right, yeah,
That's maybe a good thing to.
it
That's
is.
an early meeting and we all come in the afternoon.
Right, and so thinking about like,
A designer in there to say, hey, if you do this, we can do that.
but stuff like this is going to make for just more dynamic pages. You know, if you can think about other elements that are pushing the story forward, that are creating another entry point. You know, so when I say content driving design, you want those entry points. You want more reasons for somebody to engage in a story package, but it's got to be worthwhile content, you know, that's actually doing something for the story, for the page, and not just decoration. So this is like, I think this was actually kind of a bulky like a teaser to an inside thing that I might actually have. Yeah, so that's what we did. That's what we did on the inside. But thinking about, so this took some planning and some preparation and talking to Sean Stanley to get these, because he did videos of all these people. But the more thinking that can be done ahead of time in terms of what's the content, what do we have to deal with, or what do we have to work with, and looking for that consistency.
You know, I think this kind of illustrates what we've gotten away. I think the 21-day plan meeting eventually, the end product was that, so we had a reporter, a photographer, an editor, a designer, all working on a project ahead, you know what I mean?
Right,
So
yeah.
that there was multiple angles of analysis of what we were gonna do.
Yeah.
I don't know, we kind of let that go a little bit.
Right, yeah.
But it does, that obviously shows the benefit of it.
Right. But thinking about design, there does need to be cooperation with a number of people. So I think Anne wrote these, and had her write them all similar lengths. So if we go back to this, like one of the things that made this work is that we found quotes that were all similar in length. So if you have one that's like really short and one that's really long, you're going to have like an imbalance of white space. So like that's when I say consistency. That's what I'm talking about in terms of the photos, in terms of the lengths, and that kind of thing. Again, spacing and rules, very consistent. Everything's the same size, everything's positioned and laid out in the same way, so that leads to that consistency. This could have been maybe a little bit bigger than these, so that it was when somebody opened the page, they knew to go to the top. I mean, it's definitely bigger, but it's so high on the page that I might have made that just a little bit bigger. But the hierarchy is still there with the lead in and whatnot. Let's see here. I'll just keep going. Okay, so here's another. Talking about hierarchy, it's obviously there's only 2 stories on this page, so one is clearly much larger than the other. Looking at spacing here, so this is the same space as this from the inside of the photo. This is like half of that space here. So again, lining things up. Everything is, there's a logic and there's an order to it. Didn't want to trap the white space there, so I left it in the corners. If we were really good, we might have written one more line to that cut line, but that's okay. The photo selection here, again, detail shots that can play. I need to plug in my thing here. Where do you think the plug is? This is like Back to the Future when he like plugs in the. It's like. Yes, we made it. Okay. All right. So. All right. I'm not going to mess with that. It's going to come. The detail shots. It's smaller. Those work because the subject is larger in those photos. Maybe not the best example of that, but those are. And I'll talk more about headlines, but using the different color there, if you're trying to emphasize a word, if you're trying to, I have other examples, but yeah, I made that green. I mean, it's about like olive oil, olives, green, pressing. So that was the thinking behind turning that a different color.
So what kind of percentages do you use? Because I know sometimes when I do gray in a headline, I get nervous because I don't feel like I gray it enough. Like I don't take it down enough. Like I'll stop at 85%, which.
Oh, that's not going to be distinct at all.
It's not gonna stand out.
So
Like 50% if you want,
Really?
yeah.
Okay.
Depending on the size of the headline, you could even go smaller than that, but yeah, 50.
Okay, so take it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was like a nice alt format. Those quotes I think were just from the story, but I wanted to find quotes that were similar in length And I pretty much did that. Hierarchy on this page. This is, again, the treatment of that headline and of that package indicates that it's something special, I don't know, not just a straightforward story. And I left these like pretty plain. There's nothing extra there because there's so much going on here. I wanted the rest of the page to be really simple, pretty straightforward. So there's never a reason that you have to like dress everything up on the page. Typically my philosophy for covers is let one thing be the thing that you put time into and make look really nice, and then let the other stuff play a supporting role. As a designer, I'm always seeking ways for readers to engage with the page. So they engage with voices, like what people are saying. They engage with faces, graphics, those entry points. So design, like I said, isn't just about making things look pretty. It's about pushing, moving forward the content and looking for ways to engage the reader through design. This was a really fun infographic to do. I like the head treatment. There's some thinking behind, like, why did I turn Main Street sideways? Well, streets. It's like kind of when I think of it's just like a road is kind of like. Right, yeah. So I'm, just thinking about, and it worked for the design. I was like, oh yes, here's a design solution that actually makes sense. That was a very involved graphics. I don't really need to talk about that, but one thing to mention, and I'll have some examples over here, but getting enough story out on covers, especially the front page. Oftentimes, I'll notice that we'll run like this much story, on the front, and that was something that I paid particular attention to every day, which was making sure there was enough story out on the front.
Yeah, and I think that was left over from our Don legacy, because he was really big into like the whole USA Today.
We have an ad on the front too
Pretty
every
sure
day, so
stuff.
that's part of it. That takes away a big hunk of our.
Right, I think this.
So what's good, like 3 graphs, 4 graphs? Like, is there
I
a,
think it's more just
just looking at it and?
yeah, like it's like 3 inches is usually. A lot of times I was just trying to break out of boxes, and thinking of, again, just trying to think of different ways to pull readers in. Here, there's not there's not even a dominant image. It's just a text treatment basically. But I thought that was the best way to tell that story. So always thinking about how can this story be told visually. I like this one because this isn't really a design thing, but having people contribute content, it's great. We didn't produce anything for this package. Again, there's that spacing that's consistent all the way around. Let's see here. Here, one thing I wanted to point out was the headline treatment with what went wrong. Again, giving that emphasis on a word that you want to emphasize. Wrong. It's red. It's larger. It's the bold version. It's like really jumps out.
Did you stick with Herald red?
I do, yeah.
Cause I would color on type like the plague because our reproduction is so terrible. You know, without a register, I mean, you can look at today's and there's, you know, the reefer, the 2 touches of red that we used on the smaller fonts, at least on the label head and stuff, you just have to order.
Oh, right, yeah.
And that's, I see that so much, that I just feel like, okay, I really want to put an accent,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and draw attention to something, but on a big type font like that, you can get away with it a little bit better, certainly. But you were talking earlier about details and
You know,
I'm scared.
the reason we got the iron lung was because we were having reproduction problems in Cortez. So it was supposed to be set up, calibrated to match the Cortez.
Oh, right,
presses,
yeah.
So that we would have some idea of what was happening the next day. But I think since we went to Farmington, I don't think anyone's thought about that. I think it's still calibrated to presses that
Oh,
no
it might
longer
be,
exist.
yeah.
And,
It's
that,
less than,
and I don't think we can trust it to be what we're gonna see on the Farmington. I
no, you
think
don't even have to use the lung to know that there's no
That it's not
yellow
working.
ink put on that part of the page. I mean, like, the page varies from top to bottom and side to side so radically, and it's so out of register. It's not, you know. Anyway, I just wondered how you felt about that, if you think about that when you just assume it's gonna be right.
Yeah, I mean, it's like inconsistency in like the, you know, press, like the printing, you know. So yeah, I was just like, well, that's something that somebody else has to deal with.
Somebody else has to deal with it.
Right, yeah. Again, the hierarchy here, where
where's
it's,
that at the bottom of the page?
yeah, there it is. This might have been able to go up a little bit to give this story a little bit more space, you know, just kind of half it right there. But designing this with, you know, trying to get as much story out there with a giant plug and a graphic to go with it, I thought that was a, you know, decent amount of story. Okay, so I like this example, like when I'm talking about your limitations, like you have certain things to work with a lot of times in a story. And so for this one, as a designer, I was thinking about how to tell this story visually when we don't have a lot of art. You know, I don't know if you guys remember this one, but there was like a picture of, the only new picture we had was like somebody put up a sign somewhere that said like justice for Dylan or something like that. And I was like, that's not what we want to do with here. So thinking about what the story was about, so again, this is how content drives the design instead of vice versa. Thinking about what the story was about, what we had to work with, you know, they were still looking for, you know, the body and like still building that case. But there was a lot of things missing. So I'm like, this is kind of a story about absence, you know, like what we don't know, what's not there. And so I was like, let's do like a ton of white space, you know, and have like this one single like school picture image be the one color thing in the package, you know. So, you know, thinking about, you know, the content of the story and how the design can reflect that. And again, that hierarchy is pretty clear here with the sizes of the headlines and where they are on the page. I think it's like, so if you start off with like a 60-point headline, you know, to create like enough distinction, it should be like a 42, 44 is the next, and then like a 36, and then like maybe a 28, you know. So always the difference in headline sizes should be, you know, 10 points at least, if not more, different.
I'm not clear on our styles. Is headline 2 basically for feature treatment? And then 1 and 3 is news for news. Is that right? Am I right on that?
Well, so traditionally, and I don't know what the thinking is now, that headline, the sans serif, this one here was supposed to be like the hard news.
That's 1. Yeah.
Yeah, and then this is, no, this is 1. This is 1, this is 3.
Oh, right, yeah.
And this is one, and that's the one you're supposed to use most of the time for any. I would say 97% of the centerpiece packages I've ever designed at the Herald, I use Headline 2. To me, it's the best font we have for headlines. I like it in all caps, as you can probably tell from all of my designs. I just like its slenderness. It's a nice font. And so I would never design a centerpiece package with that bold serif font. And also I couldn't tell, but like one of these pages,
Even if it's a news centerpiece, it's not featurey, it's a horrible wreck that day.
oh, that's a little different.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, those like real newsy
Yeah.
one. That would be the exception. But I mean like a centerpiece that's our
Featurey.
yeah.
So horrible wreck, that's when the sans serif comes in handy, because it's, for a hard news story, the sans serif comes in really good for that.
Right. Yeah, and in the headline one as well, just that bold always distinguishes. And I couldn't tell, but just as a designer, like you should never mess with the integrity of the font. I know that might be like to make it more narrow than it really is, to stretch to have it like 80% width and 100% height. No good. Can't do it. Integrity of the font is very important. I got busted on that early in my design career. Oh, I'll keep going. Okay, so this was a sports page that I got my hands on. So just looking at this, what are some issues going on here?
All the photos are about the same size.
Okay, yeah?
At least 3 of them are.
Really tight, everything's tight.
Yeah, there is all that hierarchy. Well, there is with at least the font or the site is.
Well, these are pretty similar in size. That's not that much bigger.
It's all part of one big package.
Yeah, it's hard to tell where you're.
Right, so there's some navigation issues, like what do I look at first? Because for me, because of this Tim Duncan, this player here, is so large in the photo, that's where my eye goes first. So it's like, what do you...
Are there too many elements on it, just in general, so you cut it down to 2, maybe lose one of the stories?
Yeah, you could do that. I have redesigned this, so there'll be some options here. But we got 2 cut lines for these 2 photos, so it's like multiple elements there. There's not a whole lot of white space on the page, so that's makes for a really like jam-packed, cluttered page. The logic is not totally right here, where the subject of the photo is smaller, and the photo is smaller, and it's like this is larger, so like the logic isn't there. So yeah, there's so hierarchy, spacing, all those things weren't totally working. So just redoing this page, I think I kept all of the elements. I don't think I eliminated anything, but just tried to build in some hierarchy, basically. And, some white space. And this one, all the photos are kind of jammed into the same part of the page, and then this is kind of left gray down here. So really spacing out that art. So when I was talking about a page being balanced, this is a good example of that. So here it's clear what the main thing on the page is, in terms of the play that we're giving it. Change the headline sizes so we get much more distinct headline sizes. So yeah, that's where that hierarchy comes in. That's where the spacing comes in. Just makes for a cleaner page. I have these. Some of you might already have this. Do you guys remember? I don't know if Mark and I don't know if you guys were here when I gave this presentation. And Nick, okay. I can send you this. So one way to, this kind of makes it sound like, making something look pretty, but creating more entry points, so creating breakout boxes and things like that. I have some just tips and tricks on creating charts and pull-out boxes and things like that. So I can send you that. But this was one that I just, this was in the story, this information here, and I was like, oh, these numbers are great for something or other, entry points. So I just pulled those straight out of the story to create that. So, but I'll send you that. Thinking about breakout boxes and things like that, it applies to, this was like a pretty big infographic, but the rules of hierarchy still apply even to the smallest elements, So starting with this kind of, it's hard to see, I'm sure, but this big header, alternative one, these are like 3 options for the airport. Starting with these 3 big headers and then going down in size for each additional header, so even the hierarchy applies to things like that. Just kind of moving quickly here. Oh, there you go. It's a bigger. Okay, so yeah, I'll send this to you. Let's see here. So here's some examples of, when thinking about white space and trapped white space. I think this was Aaron who was doing this for a while, but he would put the label like in between the headline and the drop head, just trapping this white space in there. Like, no good, man. Yeah, that's why labels go at the top, because that white space goes off into the air. In this headline treatment here, I flushed the text to the bottom of the photo. It looks like it's hair off. That way, that white space is going out into the edges. Here's an example of a centered headline, side saddle, drop head, right to the side of the story, and centered like normal, like our style. But anytime I would do this, I would flush it right so that it was ragged left. So that again, so the white space, instead of having white space trapped right here, it's all to the side. Kind of like that. Okay, more thoughts on white space. Again here, I would have put that flush down at the bottom there. So again, so the white space was at the top of the page, or at the top of the package instead of trapped there.
It's not white space if you put a yellow box there.
That's true. Same here. So our style, I know, is to, like in pull quotes, to have the name and then the title below it. But if it's wide enough, I would always bring that title up onto the same line. Again, just to get rid of that trapped white space in there.
What do you think about, all right, so let's say you do a pull quote in the middle of a column, like let's say you have 5 columns, you put one in the middle column, in the center in the middle of the column. Would you, it looks pretty, would you center the text? It almost seems like it looks better to have it centered.
For a pull quote?
Yeah. I don't think that's technically legal, is it? We can do that? I do it anyway, because I think it just looks.
Yeah, style is set that way. I know what you mean. Everything's flush left, and you got this big triangle of white that's trapped.
Right, yeah.
So it's
And it looks bad.
probably just center it, right?
Yeah, probably so. Or
So, it's like a little, if you take the quote, you just also break in the rules, but if you're up a point size or down a point size, sometimes it'll pooch out and knock down a line or something.
So for that, with this title or whatever, you'll just skip a space and just kick it up, so it's right there.
so just put a comma after the name and then put it up.
Okay.
And the same, I would do this a lot, and this takes a little finagling because this won't go online like this, but anytime I had a wide column, like in a centerpiece or something, putting the byline name and title in the same.
The style's the same.
Yeah, and I put like one of those big straight hashes in between it. That was always just a way, because our bylines can create some like really awkward white space.
What do you use to create the bar? Do you just draw it, or do you?
It's a shift.
Because I always do it manually, and I know there's got to be a way.
It's like shift 0, I think it is, or
Okay.
I think that's the one, yeah, or something. I don't know. Yeah, again, here's a good example of that weird white space when you have like the name and title. See this a lot with, so this headline is centered over 3 columns, but it looks like there's just like this gap of space there, you know. So so there's nothing technically wrong with what this person did. It's just it doesn't look good because of the way things are set up, you know. So, but that's something as designers we have to look at and say, like, this doesn't look right. How can we make this look right? You know, what can we do? So you might have put this in the first 3 columns or something like that, or I wouldn't have put that on the same line, but just something to consider. There's just some examples of headline treatments and how to, you know, ideas for, you know, how to design some headlines, and I can pass these on to you, but because I don't know if we have time to go over, but just hitting some big things. So again, highlighting certain words, like, so these are clearly the key words in the headline, which is, and then it kind of coincided with the blue of this liquid, and this, you can't see it, but you know, so matching that blue with that blue. Here, you know, 2 sizes, but where will they live was the main emphasis of the headline, so I popped that up a little bit.
You're colorblind, huh?
Totally, as a
I
bat.
don't think they match.
No, they don't match, but it was like it's me using the Herald blue at like a 40%, but yeah. Again, highlighting certain words, playing with. You see what I did there? You see what it's thicker because the plot has thickened. You know, again, emphasizing certain words with size. That was a mistake right there. Why? Why was that a mistake? What's going on here? If you're critiquing that headline. Anyone? Anyone? Yeah, it's got this nasty little thing. Like, no good, no good. Like, that should definitely have lined up with this and been the same size. And then I would have made, that would have been a little smaller, and I would have made that a little smaller just so there's like this logic, it's like consistency to it, you know? So you don't want to have like 2 headline sizes, that's okay. 3, I guess that's kind of a headline or design philosophy, which is you don't want to overdo it, you know? So you don't want to have like 2 different headline sizes and a word that's in color, you know, or like one word is lowercase and one is all caps, or one is sentence case and one is all caps, and one is in color. You know, like you don't want to like push it too far. So here, I think it's good that you know, this is smaller, this is bigger, but they're all caps and they're the same font, you know? So don't try to shake it up too much. Here, you know, again, bold, bold, unbold. Might say that, oh, the vertical the is a thing, but whatever. This one here, the logic behind making that part of it red. Any ideas? Well, you probably can't see the whole thing. Anyway, this was about mail. You know, that was the subject of the story. And this is what we're saying, but this is a subject. And so I made it red so that that's to give it that attention. Even though it's smaller, I wanted to give it attention because that's the subject of the piece. So really thinking about logic and a reason behind what you're doing with design, whether it's designing headlines like this, or how you're playing a photo, how you're spacing something out. There should be some really clear thinking and logic behind that stuff. Again, talking about consistency, so I tracked out this part of the headline, but it's the same tracking, so that was supposed to be a bong, that's why that L is bigger. And somebody's lighting it like that. I love that design, that was cool. Let's see here. Okay, so there we go. So I'll send whoever wants this.
I want it.
So just quickly, I was looking over some pages that I just wanted to talk about a few things. So here's an example of, and I don't know who designs pages at the Durango Herald anymore, so don't take it personally. I don't even know who did it. But thinking about this, in terms of the things I've been talking about, I think this is a good example of I don't understand quite, why this is gray, why this is smaller, why it's.
You would have gone all caps with farm work too.
I probably would have, yeah. But the hierarchy of, one thing I didn't really talk about, but the hierarchy between headline and drop head. A lot of times, looking at the Herald, I noticed that certain drop heads are too big in terms of the headline it's under, and I think there's an example over here. But to me, this drop head is really competing with the size of that there.
It's supposed to go about half, right? About half the size?
That can run into, because that would be for a 30-point headline, a 15-point drop head, seems a little big. It's more of an eye thing for me. I wouldn't know, percentages. No more than half, I would say.
Right.
Which works if the larger the headline gets, that half rule kind of comes in there. But I wouldn't put a 30-point drop head on a 60-point headline, But going back to spacing, so we got some spacing issues here in terms of this just not aligning with that photo. Not a whole lot of story out there. Let's see, I want to go here. Again, not a whole lot of story there. We're getting it's what, maybe 2 inches, like 1.5 inches? Maybe 2 inches. And there's a 1-point box around here. I think that's a 1 point. So just what, why? I don't know. This page here, my critique of this is that as a reader, I didn't know how to navigate this. I didn't know what I was supposed to look at first. So, going here or here, then do I go up here? Do I go up here? This I thought could have used a header just to. I wasn't quite sure why there wasn't one on. So anyway, I just had a hard time navigating this, not totally sure what to look at first. And it might be because, this head is right there. And I wasn't quite sure what those numbers were for, but that's a more of a content issue than design. Okay, here's a good example of some spacing issues. So we have this space here, which is different than that space, which is different than that space. you know, so, you know, and which is different than that space. So we've got a lot of spacing issues going on. Not sure why that's gray.
I was being artsy.
Bad.
Look, even he's pointing at it, going, what the heck?
What the hell, why is that great?
No, he likes it. That's why it's bad. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, and you know, I would have flushed that left to, you know, to get that white space to the side. But yeah.
Same deal with that weird little space. I was trying to push in the top, both the headline and the photo, just to, you know.
Right, so that's another little thing that I haven't mentioned, which is it should be clear that you're trying to do something.
Okay.
You know, like if you're trying to, like, let's say center the headline and this photo on top of this, it's got to be like clear that that's what you're doing. Because here it just looks like it's not lined up very well, you know. But yeah.
Don't judge Nick.
Oh, I thought you said don't judge Nick.
Although it's the same thing. No, also don't judge. Although I'm sure one of his pages.
Don't judge, Nick. Okay. Here's another page here. Issues?
You know, there's nowhere to go. I mean, the photos are, at least the two top, the bottom,
Yeah.
top are the same.
About the same. Pretty similar. I mean, different headline styles, but, you know, same in size. You know, this one's a little smaller.
The centerpiece doesn't really stand out.
Right. We got this, like, pancaking thing where every every element is horizontal. So when I was talking about balance, you know, a balanced page, you want a good collection of horizontal.
Balance but not symmetry. That's what I remind myself.
Right. So here, you know, you have this which, you know, is a thinner horizontal, thin vertical, and then like this rectangle. You know, having as many different shapes. That, of course, that's a little special. That's a different kind of thing. But here, even though this is the same package, we kind of have two horizontal packages, or a square, and then the vertical. So yeah, finding the balance in the shapes that you're using. Yeah, the photos are very similar, so there's not a real clear hierarchy in terms of photo sizes, in terms of headline sizes. So yeah, being really deliberate in your design, like this is the most important thing, or this is the most important news story, this is the best photo, you know, that kind of thing, making it.
So what would be like a quick fix then?
Quick fix here?
It looks like the bottom story it's too big, that package.
Yeah, so.
It's wire, you know, you've got two locals at the top that you want to.
Yeah, you know, I might have moved this photo over, made it maybe a little smaller, but to space the photos out, and that way you could have, you know, gone like 2 columns of text over here, narrowed that up, maybe go strip, you know, down one of the sides for this story. That could have worked as a 1-column photo if you needed it.
Those stories are 4 columns, and so they have
Right,
the
yeah,
exact
so-
amount of columns.
Just starting off with, you know, this shape, and then a centerpiece.
Right.
No need to like reinvent the wheel every time in terms of how you're laying the page out, in terms of, you know, centerpiece story package here. But like, you know, like for the A&E page today, instead of going with a traditional column down the side and a story at the bottom, we had some really horizontal art. So we put 2 stories at the bottom and then used the rest of the top for that horizontal centerpiece. So.
It looks modern day and fun.
So anyway, that's all I got. Any thoughts, questions?
Make sure you send that to us, please.
Sure, yeah. But it really comes down to like spacing, hierarchies, and consistency of like lining things up. That matters so much. And just using that logic in terms of how you're treating certain things. Like if you're using color, and headlines, there should be some, real good reason for it. And like on hard news stories, or just news stories in general,
Like,
yeah, straightforward.